Andretti Company has a single product called a DAC. The company normally produces and sells 60,000 DACs each year at a selling price of $32 per unit. The company's unit cost at this level of activity are given below. We need to answer a number of questions relating to the production and sale of DACs. Each question is independent of the others. Let's begin with question number 1. Assume the Andretti Company has sufficient capacity to produce 90,000 DACs each year without any increase in fixed manufacturing overhead cost. The company could increase its sales by 25% above its present 60,000 units each year if it were willing to increase fixed selling expenses by $80,000. Would the increased fixed selling expenses be justified? Let's begin by calculating our contribution margin per unit for our DACs. Our variable expenses per unit are direct material cost of $10, direct labor cost of $4.50, variable manufacturing overhead of $2.30, and variable selling expense of $1.20. So our total variable cost per unit is $18, which means our contribution margin per unit is $14. If we were to increase sales by 25%, this would be an increase of 15,000 units. That's our current sales of 60,000 units times 25%. Since we have a contribution margin of $14 per unit, this would lead to an increase in our total contribution margin of $210,000. That's 15,000 units times $14 per unit. In order to generate this 25% increase in sales, we were told we would need to increase our fixed selling expenses by $80,000. Thus, the incremental increase in our net operating income would be $130,000. In question number 2, again an independent question, we're asked to assume that Andretti has sufficient capacity to produce, again, 90,000 DACs each year, and there's a customer in a foreign market that wants to purchase 20,000 DACs. If the import duties on the DACs would be $1.70 per unit, and the cost for permits and licenses would total $9,000, and our only selling cost associated with the order would be our $3.20 per unit in shipping cost, what would be the break-even unit selling price on this order? Our variable manufacturing cost per unit is $16.80. That's our $10 for direct materials, $4.50 for direct labor, and $2.30 per unit in variable manufacturing overhead. We were told our import duties were $1.70 per unit, and our total cost of permits and licenses would be $9,000. If we spread this out over 20,000 units, that means the cost per unit is 45 cents. And we were told our shipping cost would be $3.20 per unit. So our total variable cost per unit, or the break-even selling price, is $22.15. For question number 3, we're told the company has 1,000 DACs on hand that have some irregularities and are therefore considered to be seconds. Due to the irregularities, it will be impossible to sell these units at the normal price through regular distribution channels. What unit figure or unit cost is relevant for setting our minimum selling price? We're not going to work through this problem, but I'll give you a hint. Any cost that we've already incurred is a sunk cost and won't be relevant for setting our minimum selling price. Let's go ahead and take a look at question number 4. Due to a strike at its supplier's plant, the Andretti Company is unable to purchase more materials for the production of DACs. The strike is expected to last for 2 months, and the Andretti Company has enough material on hand to operate at 30% of normal levels for the 2-month period. As an alternative, Andretti could close its plant down entirely for the 2 months, and if the plant were closed, fixed manufacturing overhead cost would continue at 60% of their normal level during the 2-month period, while selling expenses would be reduced by 20%. What would be the impact on profits of closing the plant for the 2-month period? We're going to begin by taking a look at our contribution margin that we would generate if we were to continue operating our plant. Our unit sales, if we continue to operate, would be 3,000 units over this 2-month period. That was 30% times our monthly sales times 2 months. So 30% times our annual sales of 60,000 units divided by 12 times 2 gives us our 3,000 units. Since our contribution margin per unit is $14, 3,000 units times $14 gives us $42,000 in total contribution margin if we continue to operate. Let's go ahead and look at our avoidable fixed cost if the plant is closed. Our fixed manufacturing overhead, we were told, will continue at 60%, or in other words, we could have a 40% savings if we discontinued operations. So 40% is our avoidable cost. Our total annual manufacturing overhead is fixed manufacturing overhead is $300,000. So if we divide that by 12, we get a monthly cost of $25,000 multiplied by 2 months, and then 40% would give us our savings or avoidable cost of $20,000. Our fixed selling cost, we're told that we would still incur at 20%. So would be our savings. So if we take our $210,000 total selling cost, divide it by 12 months, we get $17,500 per month. For a 2-month period then, we would have a total of $35,000. And we're told that we could reduce our selling expenses by 20%. So 20% of $35,000 would be $7,000 in savings. Thus, the total savings from closing the plant would be $27,000. So the advantage to remaining open would be $15,000. We see this by comparing the $42,000 contribution margin we could generate by continuing to be open compared with the avoidable fixed cost of $27,000 if we were to close the plant. In question number 5, we're told an outside manufacturer has offered to produce DACs and ship them directly to our customers. If the Andretti company accepts this offer, the facilities that it uses to produce DACs would be idle. However, the fixed manufacturing overhead cost would be reduced by 75%. Because the outside manufacturer would pay for shipping costs, the variable expenses would only be 2/3 of their present amount. Compute the unit cost that is relevant for comparison to the price quoted to the outside or by the outside manufacturer. Our variable manufacturing overhead costs, again, are $16.80 per unit. That's our $10 for direct materials, $4.50 for direct labor, and $2.30 in variable overhead. Our fixed manufacturing overhead will be $3.75 per unit. We were told we would have a savings of 75%. So if we take our total manufacturing overhead of $300,000 and multiply it by 75%, we see that we would have savings of $225,000. And if we spread that over 60,000 units, our savings would be $3.75 per unit. Our variable shipping cost, we could eliminate entirely because the outside manufacturer would pay for shipping. Our variable selling expense, we're told that only 1/3 of it is relevant. In other words, 2/3 of it could be eliminated. So out of the variable selling expense of $1.20, only 40 cents is a relevant cost or an avoidable cost. So the total cost that we could avoid if we purchased the DACs from an outside supplier would be $20.95. This is the maximum price we should be willing to pay to purchase DACs from an outside supplier. Anything more than this, we should continue to make them internally. Anything less than this, it makes sense to purchase them from the outside supplier.